thank you for joining us for our Smart Women Savvy Money webinar series. We are very happy here at Urban Wealth Management because we have been sharing this Smart Women Savvy Money webinar series for the last 7 years. And our focus is really about investing in you. So for any of you who have been on our webinars in the past, and we're doing more like a podcast now, so you can listen to us and have conversations between me and our speaker. But this is a great way for you to learn about things that can help you make the best decisions in your life to create a lifestyle that you desire and deserve. Today's speaker is an amazing woman who I've been working with and have referred many of our clients to, Sona Tatiyants, who's won several awards and has been recognized. And she has 3 different jobs as a wife, a mother, and also as a business owner. And we know that as women, we always have a lot on our plate. So as an attorney, she knows how important it is to have a plan in place. And today's topic is really about estate planning. You got a trust? Is it enough? No. There is more work that needs to be done periodically for you to check in to make sure that your trust is still meeting your life needs. So with that, Sona, I want you to take over.
Renee, thank you so much for having me on. So I'm so excited to talk about this topic because I discuss this topic with my clients every single day. So whenever we talk about estate planning, I want to get one thing straight. So a trust is not a full estate plan. A trust is just a single document. It's a very important document. I think of a trust as the backbone of your estate plan, and it will help you dispose of your assets. So you would create a trust, and you won't just put it away and never want to think about it. You know, a lot of people think estate planning or planning for your death is how they think about it as a very daunting experience, and they get enough strength to do this, and then they say, you know, I never want to talk about it. But that's really not the way to think about this, because these are living, breathing documents. An estate plan is a set of documents that will capture that moment in your life, capture what's going on with your family, capture what's going on with your assets, and capture what's going on with the law. And any of those things can change, and you want to make sure that your estate plan can change as well. So the first thing I do when I meet with a client is I will say, you know, I want to get to know you, because what's important to me is that we like each other and we see each other working long term. It's not a one-time transaction. You do your trust, your will, and I never see you again. What I anticipate is when I meet with clients is I'm going to work with them for 20, 30, maybe 40 years. And what I want to do is I want to be there for them now, but I also want to be there for them as their life changes and as their assets change, as their families change, as the law changes and everything else changes, because things are going to change. On a typical estate planning client, I imagine 5 to 7 big family events or lifetime events will occur for them to come back and change their documents. Starting from the beginning, it would be, you know, if somebody's single, they create their estate plan. And a lot of people are successful nowadays. We have a lot of successful women who are, you know, buying their own homes and investing on their own without having a partner. They have very successful jobs, so they feel like they need an estate plan. Then they find their partner, and then they want to maybe update the documents. They have children. They have one child. They have another child. Unfortunately, some of my clients end up getting a divorce.
No.
They lose a family member and they get an inheritance. Or they buy an investment property, or they become a partner in their law firm, or they, you know, start a company with somebody else. There's so many moving components to what we do. So you want to make sure that your estate plan reflects what's going on in that moment in time. So the backbone of an estate plan is a trust, and the type of trust that I want to talk to you about are revocable living trusts. Revocable means that trust can be changed, and living means you create it during your lifetime. So revocable trusts are exactly that. It's going to capture what you want at that moment in time, and then if you want to change your mind down the road, you come back and we change it. So when we sign the documents for a client, including their trust, many of them will say, okay, great, I'm so glad I'm done. And I don't want to give you the false sense of, comfort that you're done, because there are things that need to be done after a trust is signed. So I like to describe a trust as a basket. It's a basket that's going to hold all your assets in it. And typically there's three roles in a trust. There's the person who creates the trust, it's the settlor, the person who manages the trust assets, the trustee, and the person who's the beneficiary. So when I think of myself, let's say I create a trust, I would create it, I would manage it, all of it would be for my benefit. But in order for the trust to really impact not just me, but the future people who will be my future beneficiaries, it's important for me to put my assets in the trust, and that's called funding the trust. So if you think of a trust as a basket, you don't want to have an empty basket. You want your assets to be in the basket, because whatever is inside this basket will dictate how those assets will be distributed. So if you have an empty basket, really you've created a trust that doesn't have any assets in it, and the assets will still pass according to what your probate law says, or we may still have to go to court. So the most common asset that's put in a basket is your house. Whenever we create a trust for a client, we will go ahead and change the title of the home to put it into the trust. So that would be done via a deed that is recorded with the appropriate county recorder's office. And if you live in California and many other states that have property taxes, you also want to make sure you file paperwork with the assessor's office or the appropriate office in your state so that the property taxes don't go up. Putting a home into a revocable trust is an exempt transaction. We just need to let the assessor's office know, especially in California, where they're very, very excited to try to reassess everyone's property. So we want to let them know, hey, putting a home into a revocable trust is an exempt transaction. I'm still the person who benefits from it. I'm still the one who can control the house, so do not reassess it. It's just going into my trust for estate planning purposes. Other common assets, and I'm sure you see this a lot, Renee, are investment accounts, savings accounts, stock accounts. Once you have a trust, you want to designate those accounts to go into the trust. And the beauty of having a trust is not only will it dictate what happens to you after you're gone, after you have passed away, but even when you're incapacitated, it will allow your successor decision maker, successor trustee to have access to these accounts to use it for your benefit, to give you the best health care, to keep you in your house, or whatever your wishes are. You want to make sure whoever is the person who will make decisions for you afterwards, before you pass away, they have access to those assets, and putting it into a trust will allow you to do that. So depending on the type of an asset, it would typically, when you change the title, if you work with Renee, for example, you let Renee know, and she will have you fill out certain paperwork. So the way you know it's in the trust, when you start getting your monthly statements, whether they're mailed to you or emailed to you, you will see that the statements now will say, instead of just my name, it would have Sona Tatiyants, trustee of Tatiyants Family Trust. It would have my name on it as a trustee and the trust name. So that's how you know that's done. I'm sure you see a lot of that, Renee, right?
Yes, I do. And, one of the key points, too, to your point, too, is that when you're making changes to your trust, and you're changing the trustee, if there's a successor trustee on there, we need to have those documents to verify that. Yeah.
So in case of incapacity, you know that you've designated a new person, and you don't want the old person to come and have access to the funds when you've actually made a change.
Yes.
That's a really good point. So other assets we have where we want to designate beneficiaries would be, for example, life insurance. So interesting thing about life insurance, typically the person whose life is insured is also the owner of the life insurance policy. You more likely than not will not change the ownership to the trust, but you would do it via beneficiary designation. You would designate either an individual if that individual is an adult, or a trust if you want, let's say, the funds for the individual you designated not to be distributed to them right away. Let's say you have minor children. You don't want the minor children to ever be designated as beneficiaries, but you want their funds to be funneled into your trust, and the successor trustee will accept the funds for them and manage it according to the specific milestones you put in place, instead of everything going to a child at the age of 18, which is what would happen if you were to designate a minor child as a beneficiary. It would go, let's say, into a trust and be held for their benefit until 25, 30, 35. You can specify, the funds could be used specifically for their education, for them to buy a house. So when you have a trust, you get to decide who gets it, who gets your assets, when they get it, and how they get it. So you have a lot of control about how the distribution would happen. The other interesting one is retirement accounts, because as I know you discuss a lot with your clients, Renee, 401ks, IRAs are tax-deferred accounts. We don't want those to go into a trust. If you were to transfer the ownership of your 401k into your trust, all the income taxes you deferred would immediately be due right away. So it's not a good tax consequence. So we want to make sure we're looking at each individual asset, looking at what the tax consequences are before they go in the trust, or what they would be like once they're paid out, and then strategize with your attorney either to put something directly in the trust, to name a beneficiary or a spouse as a beneficiary, or to name the trust as a beneficiary. So those are they all have different tax consequences, and they would be done in different situations. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I have very different conversations with clients who have adult children who are trustworthy. They want their children to inherit their money right away, versus clients who have children who are minors or have special needs, are spendthrifts. There are different strategies you want to follow in how you want these beneficiaries, successor beneficiaries, to get your assets.
Right. Can you also just kind of address, with the Secure Act that just passed here in January, some advisors and attorneys have raised their hand and said, if you are making your retirement account, making your trust the beneficiary of your retirement account, that might be a little bit of a problem. So any thoughts about that?
Well, so the interesting thing about the Secure Act before, what you could do with a retirement account is you could leave it to a beneficiary, and if the beneficiary, let's say, is an adult, they could stretch out the retirement account for their lifetime based on their lifetime, and they could take the small required minimum distribution and pay taxes only on that amount. With the Secure Act, the maximum that, there's some exempt people like minors and spouses, but the most that someone can stretch it out would be for 10 years. The idea is that you have to take out the funds earlier and to pay taxes on it earlier. Now, if you have minor children, Renee, you still don't want your children to ever get their funds right away. So what would happen is you would still name the trust as a beneficiary, and my understanding is that 10-year over which they can now stretch over only kicks in after a child turns 18. So if you have a 2-year-old, you don't want them to be directly named as a beneficiary of your IRA. You would still name the trust as the beneficiary. If you were to pass away, the funds would go into a trust. They would be stretched out until the child turns 18 plus another 10 years. It's not ideal because, if you have the largest asset in your estate is your retirement account, you don't want those immediately to be cashed and to pay for all the income taxes. But again, if that's the only way that your child's going to be taken care of, it's better that it's done within the trust than outside of the trust. Otherwise, it will go through a guardianship process, and the courts will be involved how the funds will be distributed to the children. There is no one-size-fits-all, but with minor children, I would still say putting it into a trust, even with the Secure Act, would still have better consequences for the minor children than leaving them as beneficiaries.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I just spoke to you about what would happen when you create a trust. immediately after, you want to make sure your assets are in the trust. Let's talk generally when you want to revisit your estate plan or your trust planning documents. Again, when I meet with a client, I really value long-term relationships because I know I could put the best plan in place for them. But if they don't call me for the next 20 years and something happens to them in 20 years, I know that plan will no longer be the right plan for them, because if things have changed, you want to make sure that you revisit your estate plan and discuss it with your client. So there are three big categories. When you see a change, you want to visit your attorney again. One is family, so changes in the family. You have a birth of a child, birth of a grandchild. I will see a lot in estate planning documents where clients leave money directly to children and also grandchildren. Then they have more grandchildren, and that language is never updated. So the grandkids who were born after they created the estate planning documents don't get anything, and they're left out. And really, that's never the intention of the grandparent who does this, but because they haven't revisited the document, all of a sudden they have grandchildren who are left out. Another common one would be death of a loved one. You have designated your spouse or best friend to either receive your assets after you're gone, to designate as trustees. And if those people are gone and you don't have a secondary and a tertiary person in mind, then all of a sudden you're back to square one. You've only designated one beneficiary, one decision maker. That person's gone. You're back to square one. You don't have anything in place. Wow. The other one is divorce. Divorce is a very big one. People get divorced and they don't update their beneficiary designations. I'm sure you see that a lot. And what happens is, this is what happens when you don't seek a professional. People will try to save money and go to paralegal to help them with the divorce, but they never update their trust documents. They never update their decision makers or beneficiary designations, and beneficiary designations control. So it's so important to not only finalize the divorce, but also make sure that all the assets are now properly titled and designated with the new beneficiaries.
Yeah, that is definitely a big problem. We've had some clients to come in, they've been divorced, or they've lost their spouse. Their spouse has passed away. And they have not changed the beneficiaries on things.
Yep. That happens a lot. So the second time where you want to revisit with your attorney is when you have a change in your assets. For example, I'm actually handling a case like that right now where husband and wife created a trust and they put their home in the trust 20-odd years ago. Then they sold that house and they purchased a new house, and the new house never went in the trust. So they have an empty basket. Essentially, they have a trust that was once funded, that was something inside the basket, but once they sold it, they never put the new house into it. And now that the husband passed away, I need to deal with how do I bring it back into the trust and have the trust control how the distributions will happen with the property. So changes in your property, purchase of a home, purchase of an investment property, getting an inheritance, that's a really big one. Everyone is under the impression that the inheritance you receive when you are married is a community property asset. That is definitely not the case. Anything you inherit, even if you're married, even if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, is your separate property. So I will see a lot of times clients will inherit property and immediately they add their spouse's name thinking that that's what the law dictates, but it doesn't. So you get an inheritance, I think it's a good idea for you to talk to an attorney, because it's very common for me to plan for clients joint assets. For example, a husband and wife may have their assets together and they have a joint trust. But if one of them gets an inheritance, we could also have a separate trust, separate property trust for that person and their inheritance. Because they may say if one spouse passes away, the survivor will get all the assets. But if the survivor also receives the separate property, they can remarry and give everything to the new spouse and the new spouse's children, and nothing goes back to your biological children. So getting an inheritance is a really good time for you to meet up with your attorney, discuss and say, do we need a separate trust? Do we need to do something else that's different with this? Right. Purchasing or selling a business, those also have a lot of implications, and they should be addressed in your estate plan. Especially, I see a lot of clients who will have a business partner, but there's no language what happens to your account or your business when your business partner passes away. Do you become a partner with their spouse? Is that something you sign up for? What if me and you, Renee, we start a business, but one of us passes away? We didn't sign up to be in a business with our partners. We sign up to be in business together. So those are all important. They have all important implications, and they should be addressed in your estate planning documents. What happens to your business if you were to pass away, or your spouse was to pass, or your business partner was to pass away?
Very good point. Yes.
The last thing that really should trigger for you to discuss things with your estate planning attorney is the law. The law has been changing a lot. With the passing of the Secure Act, we have these changes in stretch-out provisions for retirement accounts. But really the biggest one I have seen in the 15 years that I have been practicing is the high estate tax exemption, meaning when you pass away, you can give a certain amount of funds or assets tax-free. When I had just started practicing law 15 years ago, that amount was $1 million. If I had given more than $1 million away in 2005, I would have to pay estate taxes on it. That amount is now close to $12 million.
Wow.
So can you believe it? It's for 2020, it's $11,580,000.
Wow.
So that number has gone up significantly. But I see trusts that were created in the 90s, early 2000s, with the presumption that the estate tax was $1 million. So when one spouse passed away, they would create these various structures, a bypass trust or a Q-tip trust, to preserve each spouse's exemption. These things were done because the big driving force was avoid paying estate taxes at 40%, anything over the exemption amount. So you can imagine people were willing to do anything to avoid that. As a result, there are lots of trust structures that are very complicated and no longer applicable today. So when a client passes away, when a spouse passes away, the surviving spouse comes to me and I say, you created this trust that said when one of you dies, we have to divide it into 2 sub-trusts. Bypass trust, you may not have access to it, or you have to file taxes and we have to get valuations. Lots of different things that need to be done. They look at me and they say, well, no, that's not what I intended. I intended everything to go to the survivor. But under those laws, that's how we would create those documents. So revisit your documents often. If you have a change in your family, if you have a change in your assets, if you have a change in the law, go revisit your attorney so that you're not stuck with something that you created 20 years ago and you still think it works for you when really it does not. It's so much easier for clients while they have capacity to go and update the documents than me have to try to figure out how do we get around something after a person has passed away or after a person is incapacitated.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, I mean, there have been a lot of changes in the tax laws in the last 5 years.
Correct.
Or 6 years probably at this point. So anyone who has had a trust done 10 years ago or 6 years ago, and now we've had this substantial increase in the amount of the estate tax exemption, even though it's supposed to drop back to the pre-2018 values.
It's in 2025.
So would you recommend that someone go ahead and update their trust and then make plans, unless there's some continuity in this law, that they would need to come back to their estate planning attorney to update that trust? Because right now you won't have any estate taxes on any amount of your estate. And what will the number go back to in 2025?
It's going to be $5 million plus adjusted based on cost of living adjustment. So unless the client has a husband and wife have a $10 million estate, or they're close to $10 million estate, or a single person has a close to $5 million estate, it may still make sense to change it. You know, it also may make sense for you to revisit with an attorney if you have a large estate. You know, if you wanted to gift things away now and use some of your gift exemption out of that $11 million, when the amount goes down to the $5 million, you may have been able to gift certain assets out of your estate. So absolutely revisiting with an attorney, strategizing, gifting while you're alive, gifting via investment assets to your children or other loved ones, gifting to charities. Those are all strategies that your attorney will sit down with you and discuss. And it may not be applicable, but at least you know what your options are. Versus I sometimes will have clients come with their parents, and I will review the documents, prepare a memorandum, and say, this is what the trust says. Now tell me what you think the trust says. Mm-hmm. And they think it's completely the opposite of what I told them. So, you know, if it still reflects your wishes, fine, let it be. But if it doesn't, at least you know that you can change it. And more likely than not, when we revisit the documents, more people than not will say that no longer reflects what I want to do. Mm-hmm. So I think even if with the looming exemption may go down, you know, we may have a different president who may decide to keep it on too. So we're planning with the uncertainty. The only certainty is our assets. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Most people may still fall under this, married couples may fall under this $10 million exemption. Right. And they may want to make it simple for their children, make it simple for the people who are going to take over after they're gone.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to that point, you know, oftentimes we'll find out that it's important if you no longer have a relationship or you don't trust somebody, you need to change your trustee and your successor trustees. And oftentimes I have this problem where, as I mentioned, I think at the head of this is that when someone passes away and they're co-trustee, and this has happened twice with a couple of longtime clients, and they didn't understand that with their spouse on there, that they had to update the trust because now it's just them as the trustee. And they were like, well, I don't want to pay an attorney. Like, you need to pay the attorney because otherwise you're going to have some problems from the state standpoint. You know, if you wanted to refinance or sell your home, you would have to have the deceased person's signature on the documents. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's so important, and thank you for sharing all of this, because oftentimes, like we said at the beginning, you got your trust, you got your estate plan, are you done? No, you still need to stay on top of this and revisit and look at it to make sure that all of the things that you put in place, the people that you selected, are still the folks that you want. So, Absolutely. Perfect, perfect. And so, Sona, just to close out, can you tell us about where your offices are and where you're located? And we'll certainly include some links to our podcast members so that they know where you're located to reach out to you if they want to work with you.
Sure, I'd love that. So we are in Los Angeles. Our primary office is in Glendale. That's the east side of Los Angeles next to Pasadena. And I do have a satellite office in Sherman Oaks that's in the Valley. And I go to the Sherman Oaks office about once a week. I also often meet with clients virtually. So I do have clients who live up north in other parts of California. I'm only licensed to practice in California. I'm a certified specialist in the California area. If you are located outside of California and you need a referral to somebody else, please reach out to me. I do have lots of colleagues in other states. So if I'm not able to help you, I'm happy to put you in touch with a colleague who practices in another state and may be able to help you as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for your time today. You will definitely just listen to this again and again, but also we want you to be on task with our upcoming programs. Next month, we have an amazing speaker, another amazing speaker. All of our women are amazing, yes. And this one is want to leave a fabulous impression. How can you create a successful and differentiate yourself during an interview? For us, a lot of us as women, we really have to be on top of that because sometimes our level of confidence is not as great, as wonderful as we are. So just being confident and really being able to promote yourself is key. So with that said, thank you so much.
Thank you,
so
Renee.
much,
Thanks
Sona,
for having me.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.